In a world where noise has become an integral part of everyday life, where voices compete for attention and opinions flow like a torrent, there exists another force, shrouded in silence. This is a silence that is not merely the absence of sound, but a presence, full of observation and understanding. People are not afraid of the emptiness of silence, but of its insight, its ability to see through masks and refuse to participate in superficial games. In an era when loudness is often mistaken for strength, true power manifests in the ability to listen, observe, and wait. Friedrich Nietzsche once remarked, "The higher we soar, the smaller we appear to those who cannot fly." This statement reflects the essence of dangerous silence. It is a flight inaccessible to those who are accustomed to staying on the ground in a world of noise and bustle. Such silence is terrifying because it cannot be controlled. It exists outside the framework of accepted rules and expectations. In modern society where dominance in conversations, flooding the internet with opinions, and demonstrating confidence at every turn are considered signs of strength, silence seems an anomaly. However, as Nietzsche asserted, true strength does not need to shout or applaud. It quietly sits in the shadows, observing, analyzing, and preparing for the moment when its action will be most effective. And once you grasp this philosophy, you can never be underestimated again. In an era when the world extols extroversion and open self-expression, Friedrich Nietzsche, on the contrary, felt a deep admiration for those shrouded in a veil of silence, for those who refrain from vehement reactions and refuse to explain their motives, remaining a mystery to others. Why did such silence evoke such strong interest in him? The fact is that it appeared to him not as some kind of emptiness, but as a manifestation of absolute control, as a presence that does not need introduction. And it was this state, according to the philosopher, that caused people much more anxiety than any outburst of anger or manifestation of aggression. Modern society, as Nietzsche noted, has built a certain formula. A person's existence is determined by his ability to speak, and the value of an individual is measured by how visible he is. But what happens when an individual consciously refuses to play by these rules? When he does not seek the approval of others, does not rush to defend himself, and does not crave attention? Such a person, according to the philosopher, inevitably frightens the crowd, because he cannot be manipulated, since he does not need anyone's approval. It is impossible to win a victory over someone who has already achieved self-control. Nietzsche deeply understood this feature of human nature and called for the emergence of a new type of personality. Not one who seeks to fit into the accepted framework, but one who goes beyond it. The Übermensch, in his view, is a being woven from silence and steel, unwavering and not needing excuses, not because he is loud and intrusive, but because he simply does not need to be. The modern world in which we live seems to never fall silent. One only needs to look at social networks to see a constant and desperate hunger for attention. People shout into the void, using selfies, expressing opinions, expressing outrage, and demonstrating their virtues. Everyone plays a certain role. Everyone strives to be seen. However, Nietzsche would probably look at this modern circus with a sense of deep disgust. For him, this was not a manifestation of strength, but rather a symptom of spiritual decline. He foresaw this trend more than a century ago, a world where people exchange meaning for comfort, truth for applause, and the pursuit of greatness is replaced by an obsession with being liked. This type of person the philosopher called the last man. The modern man, however, is not an embodiment of evil or a monster in human form. His essence is much more insidious. He strives for security, avoids sharp corners and depth of thought. Hedonism, the pursuit of popularity and comfort, have become his main priorities. And unfortunately, this type of personality is now found everywhere. He actively expresses his indignation on social networks, carefully creates his public image, tirelessly consumes content, and naively believes that he is free. However, in reality, he is in the grip of public opinion, becoming addicted to information noise. Friedrich Nietzsche argued that most people are afraid of silence because it forces them to look deep within themselves. When a personality is built on the desire to be noticed and approved, solitude with one's thoughts becomes an unbearable test. That is why silence causes a feeling of awkwardness, and unpredictability in the behavior of others creates discomfort. After all, when a person does not react violently, does not publish everything in a row, and does not share excessive information, he becomes a mirror reflecting the inner world of others. And most people cannot bear to look in this mirror. They prefer to blend into the crowd just to avoid facing the unpleasant truth about their true nature. In today's world overflowing with a constant stream of information and hustle, people who prefer to remain silent are often subjected to distorted perceptions. They are often seen as arrogant, insensitive, weak, awkward, or even antisocial elements of society. However, as Friedrich Nietzsche would have insightfully noted, such a misconception stems from the herd's inability to recognize the true power hidden in silence. The herd only understands those who seek universal attention and approval. A silent person poses a threat to the herd because they defy classification and control. They do not need constant validation of their importance and do not follow generally accepted behavioral patterns. That is why the herd seeks to suppress them, labeling them and trying to explain what they cannot understand. However, Nietzsche had deep admiration for such people. Those who choose solitude not because of an inability to adapt to society, but because of a conscious refusal to demean themselves for the sake of universal recognition. The philosopher believed that true strength lies in a person's ability to withstand isolation and not need external approval to feel complete. When a personality is not built on the applause of others, it becomes untouchable and invulnerable. In a society where dependence on universal attention has reached its peak, the scariest person is the one who doesn't care whether they are being watched or not. In Nietzsche's worldview, strength does not manifest as it is commonly praised in society. It is not expressed in loud statements, boasting, or a stormy reaction to events. It is not the person who constantly asserts their opinion, craves applause, or seeks to dominate in every situation. True strength, according to Nietzsche, has a quiet and contemplative nature. It observes, waits for the right moment, and, when necessary, strikes with astonishing precision. At the heart of Friedrich Nietzsche's philosophical inquiries lies the concept of the Übermensch, a figure whose essence is often distorted by superficial interpretations. Contrary to popular belief, the Übermensch is by no means an embodiment of arrogant dominance or ruthless tyranny. Rather, it is an individual who has risen above the conformist moral standards dictated by society. They inhabit a realm that extends beyond the usual categories of good and evil, not because of amorality, but because of the ability to independently create values. However, before reaching this peak, they must go through a path of solitude, separating from the collective consciousness. The danger emanating from the Übermensch lies not in their pursuit of power as such, but in their self-sufficiency, in the absence of a need for external validation. They do not need their voice to be heard or to be understood. Their existence is an embodiment of groundedness, inner strength, and purposefulness. In their silence lies a depth, especially noticeable in a world where reaction has become the dominant form of interaction. As Nietzsche once remarked, he who has a why to live can bear almost any how. This why, this inner motivation, is the foundation on which the archetype of the silent person is built. They are not influenced by fleeting trends, not guided by resentment or groupthink. Their roots go deeper, into a personal mission, philosophical convictions, their own moral code. This is what makes them unpredictable, incomprehensible, and unwavering in their resolve. Human nature is such that the unknown and uncontrollable evoke fear. Therefore, when an individual refuses to follow generally accepted social norms, when they are restrained in expressing emotions and do not seek publicity, society tends to label them as cold, dangerous, or even inhuman. However, as Friedrich Nietzsche argued, that is precisely the point. The archetype of the silent person does not react to external stimuli, not because they are incapable, but because they do not see the need. They do not waste time on empty gossip and intrigue, do not participate in petty conflicts for the sake of feeling alive, do not respond to provocations with aggression. They realize that true strength lies not in reactivity, but in sovereignty. Such a person can enter a room without saying a word, but their presence already causes discomfort to those who are used to living superficially, because they thrive in noise and bustle. The silence they bring with them frightens them, because in that silence, the truth sounds clear. For contrast, consider the reactive person, the one who must shout to be heard, who needs to win arguments to feel intelligent, who surrounds themselves with constant validation to avoid the sensation of inner emptiness. Such a person lacks true strength. They are rather driven by fear. They hide behind noise because silence would expose their inner void. The silent archetype that Nietzsche wrote about has already confronted this emptiness and emerged not broken, but tempered. They are alone not because society rejects them, but because they consciously chose solitude, preferring it to selling their soul. This is what makes them so frightening to many. In an age dominated by superficial images, they prioritize meaning. In a society consumed by the thirst for universal attention, they are drawn to the depth of thought. In a world insistently demanding immediate reaction, they choose wise silence. This is the kind of person the insightful Nietzsche admired. It's not a conqueror striving for power, not an influential politician, and not a puppet in the hands of the crowd, but an individual confidently walking their unique path, maintaining composure and equanimity because they have already won the most important victory over themselves. This archetype is the embodiment of silent power, the prototype of the very Übermensch the philosopher dreamed of. That's why, according to Nietzsche, the most dangerous person doesn't raise their voice in a shout. They prefer to observe what is happening around them, patiently waiting for the right moment. And when they finally begin to act, the world stands still in anticipation, heeding every word. Silence is not emptiness, not the absence of anything significant. On the contrary, it's a powerful presence, like a mirror reflecting all that those around it are desperately trying to hide. When a person enters a room and chooses silence, they involuntarily disrupt the usual balance of power. After all, most people strive not for truth, but for control. Control over the impression they make, over the reactions of others, and over the general course of events. However, silence deprives them of this illusory power. When a person doesn't respond to provocations, doesn't justify themselves, and simply observes, they force others to face their greatest fear, themselves, their inner demons, and their hidden motives. That's why Friedrich Nietzsche saw silence as a manifestation of strength. By refraining from words, a person not only saves their resources, but also deprives those around them of the illusory sense of understanding. The unknown breeds fear because people fear what they cannot explain, predict, or control. In the modern world, communication often turns into a spectacle where two egos clash, striving to impress, dominate, or earn approval. And when one of the participants refuses to play by these rules, the whole construction collapses. Silence is like a mirror reflecting people's need for constant noise to feel complete. Remember how someone couldn't stand your gaze, or how your calmness disarmed a provocateur, or how simple silence made the other person uncomfortable. This isn't a sign of weakness, but a manifestation of strength through self-control. As Nietzsche asserted, silence inspires just as much terror as words. It demonstrates a lack of need for others' approval and recognition. In a world where validation is a valuable currency, silence makes a person unimaginably wealthy. Consider the phenomenon of silence from a psychological point of view, where it acts as a tool that deprives the individual of their usual social defenses. Speech often serves as a kind of shield, allowing us to fill pauses, avoid awkward situations, and hide true feelings. However, when a person consciously chooses silence, they force those around them to face the reality of the moment without embellishment. At such moments, hidden character traits are exposed: insecurity, a tendency to pose, a need for attention, or, conversely, the ability to observe calmly. Modern psychology confirms that discomfort in silence often indicates internal discord. People who avoid silence are not afraid of emptiness as such. but of the echoes of their own inner world. Silence is not passivity, but an active position with particular clarity. As an example, consider the work of experienced investigators who, in their practice, use silence much more often than direct pressure. When an investigator falls silent, the suspect begins to experience internal tension and loses control of the situation. Silence creates a vacuum that requires immediate filling. Another example is influential leaders, such as Vladimir Putin, who do not need loud statements and excessive explanations. He prefers to wait, maintaining an impassive appearance, allowing those around him to feel the pressure of his silence. Such silence translates to, "I don't need to demonstrate my strength, you will feel it yourself." Even in fiction, we can find examples. Remember Don Draper from Mad Men, who rarely shows emotion and isn't prone to impulsive reactions? But when he speaks, his words carry weight. This isn't because of the loudness of his voice, but because the silence lends significance and depth to each word. Consider the personality type that spends days in fruitless Twitter battles, craving the approval of the crowd to fuel their sense of self-importance, unable to close their eyes until their point of view becomes public knowledge. This individual is certainly loud, but they cannot be called strong. Their verbosity only serves as proof of inner emptiness, and the endless stream of opinions testifies to a lack of clarity of thought. In contrast, the silent archetype, inspired by Nietzsche's philosophy, does not participate in such games. They do not consider it necessary to explain their motives because they have long since come to an understanding of themselves. Their silence is not dictated by coldness, but is a manifestation of self-control, based on unwavering inner confidence. And there is nothing that scares insecure people more than a person who remains unperturbed. Silence exposes weaknesses in their armor, depriving them of the opportunity to hide behind a mask. At this moment, they find themselves defenseless, and this is what causes their fear. They are not afraid of what might be said, but of the inability to predict further actions. Unpredictability, as we know, is a source of power. Therefore, the next time someone insists on a reaction, pause, take a deep breath, and let the silence speak for itself, watching as the opponent trembles under its weight. In a world where loud voices dominate, striving to increase the number of subscribers and the speed of expressing opinions, Nietzsche offered a radically different approach, the will to power. However, this idea is often misinterpreted. The will to power is not the desire to suppress others, not a competition in the loudness of voice or control over people through brute force. At its core, this concept implies mastery over oneself, self-overcoming, curbing impulses, disciplining desires, and directing energy inward until it accumulates, thickens, and becomes unshakable. It is in this context that silence becomes a powerful and dangerous weapon. Silence is by no means a sign of powerlessness, but rather a skillful restraint of enormous power. Silence is not a manifestation of weakness, but, on the contrary, a focused concentration of inner energy. As Nietzsche urged, do not strive for cheap popularity and universal attention. It is much more important to transform oneself, to become the person who does not need to raise their voice to be heard, because the very presence of such a person speaks louder than any words. It is no coincidence that Nietzsche avoided verbose manifestos and tedious lectures. Instead, he preferred aphorisms, short but capacious and explosive sentences. Just one line could contain an entire philosophical system. Why? Because truth does not need volume. It needs density and depth. Remember his famous saying, "He who has a why to live can bear almost anyhow." This phrase is not just a wise observation, it is a sharp blade, minimalist but precise and deadly. It is like the silence that the philosopher admired so much. This is the principle of true power. Not in chaotic noise and rage, but in focus and restraint. After all, silence is not just a passive position, it is a powerful strategic tool. It allows you to confuse the enemy, establish dominance without resorting to physical force. Test a person's mind, test their resilience in the absence of confirmation and support. Silence is an effective interrogation technique, an important negotiating tactic, and a deep spiritual practice. When a person speaks, they reveal their cards, give away their secrets. When they are silent, they get the opportunity to observe, analyze, and draw conclusions. And observation, as we know, is the first and necessary step to gaining control over the situation. In an era when fleeting thoughts instantly fly across Twitter, and opinion leaders trade in ostentatious sincerity, not shutting up for a minute, the figure of a silent man, immersed in self-reflection and acting only when necessary, acquires an almost mythical halo. Why is this happening? The reason lies in the fact that silence creates mystery, and mystery in turn becomes a source of power. This is a kind of manifestation of the will to power, realized through deliberate inaction. This is the ability to declare, "I do not intend to waste my energy in vain. I do not need anyone's approval or understanding. I'm not afraid of obscurity." This position is rejected by those who are used to living in a herd, because their survival directly depends on constant feedback, mutual confirmation, and common signals. However, the Nietzschean individual, striving for the state of the Übermensch, chooses a different path. They speak less, and therefore become more significant. This is the paradox. The fewer words you utter, the stronger the impression you make on others. The deeper your silence, the more they tend to project their own thoughts and expectations onto you. And it is this projection that becomes your power. You cease to be just a person, transforming into a symbol, an insoluble enigma that everyone around you seeks to decipher. And in this unsolved mystery lies your power and control. Ask yourself the defining question. Do you strive for deafening noise or a deep sense of your presence? Do you crave fleeting attention or aspire to lasting influence? The will to power, according to the philosopher, is not a showy demonstration of brute force, but rather the achievement of a state of deep-rootedness, complete absorption in one's mission, when nothing can shake your resolve. Neither agonizing silence, nor oppressive loneliness, nor even universal misunderstanding can deter you from your path. For this is the highest degree of self-possession, the ability to move through the world without unnecessary noise, yet steadily subjecting it to your will. He's shy, she's just socially awkward, they must be insecure, are the labels that society hastily affixes to those who prefer silence. Instead of seeing them as strong and focused individuals, they are considered not like everyone else. However, Friedrich Nietzsche would have scornfully rejected such a judgment. For him, silence is not a deficiency, but a sign of refinement, not a manifestation of passivity, but rather a conscious choice. In a world deafened by incessant noise, a person who chooses silence does so not because they cannot speak, but because they refuse to waste words in vain. Modern society has conditioned us to explain our every step, to express our opinions on every issue, to share every fleeting thought, to demonstrate round-the-clock transparency, as if concealing anything makes us suspicious. But Nietzsche's worldview offers a completely different perspective on this issue. He believed that the more a person is rooted in themselves, the less they need words, the less they have to account to the world for their inner life. For true self-possession does not need to be noticed. In the public consciousness, a distorted perception of people who prefer silence often forms, stemming from fears of what remains unsaid and undisclosed. Friedrich Nietzsche deeply understood this pattern, arguing that the strongest connections are invisible. It is quiet people who hold these unseen threads, while others expend energy seeking attention. They, on the other hand, observe, wait, and analyze the situation. They do not seek to fill the void with meaningless chatter, but speak only when it is truly necessary, which makes them unpredictable and potentially dangerous to those around them. Society believes that silence is a sign of insecurity, but often this is the complete opposite of the truth. Silence may indicate not confusion, but disinterest in participating in other people's games and a lack of impression from what is happening. Suffice it to recall that at business meetings, the most talkative person is not always the smartest, and in disputes, the one who shouts the loudest often feels the most insecure in their rightness. In social networks, those who react violently to every news item, become easy prey for manipulators. Quiet people who can pause, listen attentively, and reflect possess a special psychological power. Nietzsche would argue that this is not weakness, but a manifestation of a different kind of power. However, the modern world does not know how to react to power that is not flaunted, preferring loud statements, hashtags, and bombastic speeches, demanding the exposure of the soul. Silence does not allow this, protecting the inner world of a person. This is the main misconception. Quiet people do not trail behind events, but are ahead, so far ahead that they do not need to declare their superiority. They saw the falsehood in what was happening and made a choice in favor of depth rather than superficial attention. In a world mired in information noise, such a decision becomes truly revolutionary. How can we comprehend this awe-inspiring Nietzschean silence, this deep stillness, full of meaning and power? The starting point here is self-control, the ability to curb one's impulses. Most people, when faced with a situation of tension or conflict, immediately seek to give an answer, provide explanations, and defend their position. However, true power lies in the ability to pause, to maintain silence. Let this silence become eloquent. Let it make opponents uncomfortable. Let them try to fill the void themselves. And at that moment, observe what secrets they reveal. After all, silence has a dual effect. It exposes those around you and simultaneously elevates the one who possesses it. Imagine a situation of confrontation. Instead of succumbing to emotions and reacting violently, remain calm and composed. Maintain your posture, exude confidence, and simply wait. Suddenly, you will see your opponent begin to lose balance. Their confidence evaporates because silence knocks the ground out from under the feet of insecure people. It deprives them of the familiar feedback they crave. Their carefully prepared performance turns into an incoherent monologue, and they themselves appear in an unfavorable light. Friedrich Nietzsche did not just reason about the power of silence. He embodied it in his life and work. His aphorisms were distinguished by brevity, accuracy, and depth. They're like surgical incisions that reveal the essence of things. The philosopher did not seek to soothe or pacify the reader. His goal was to pierce his consciousness with the minimum number of words. This is the key point. Do not explain everything to the end. Do not reveal all your cards. Mystery is the true source of power. The more you open up to the world, the more predictable you become. And Nietzsche was convinced that a strong person should never be completely read. This is not about manipulating those around you, but about gaining self-control and self-possession. You are not obliged to reveal your inner world to every passerby. Let others speculate. Let them project their own thoughts and feelings onto you. Your silence becomes a mirror in which their true intentions and experiences are reflected. Their reaction tells you everything you need to know. How is this mesmerizing silence created, this inner stillness so different from the deafening cacophony of the world? The secret lies not in fleeing from the noise, but in immersing oneself in solitude. It is necessary to set aside time for solitude, for the creative act of writing, for deep reflection, and to do this not for fleeting approval on social networks, not to confirm one's own significance, but to gain inner clarity. You should ask yourself questions. In what situations does reactivity manifest itself? Where does the obsessive need to justify oneself, prove one's rightness, and defend oneself arise? Then you need to let these needs fade away, let them go. After all, as Nietzsche wisely noted, it is necessary to become who you really are, and not who you have been taught to be, not who the crowd welcomes, but your authentic self, the one who hides under the mask of noise. And this true version of yourself does not need to shout at the top of its voice. It is enough to simply enter the room and remain silent, because everything in a person already speaks for itself. I know who I am. Ultimately, the silent figure that Nietzsche wrote about is not timid or shy. It is not passive or indifferent. On the contrary, it is precise, detached, sharp as a blade that never needs to be drawn from its scabbard. In a world where noise is so generously rewarded, where constant publications, excessive self-expression, and endless explanations are valued, silence becomes a real rebellion. It seems to say, I don't need your approval. I'm not afraid of your misunderstanding. I have already mastered myself, and you are only trying to catch up with me. And this sight is truly terrifying. It is likely that a person will face ridicule and labeling, such as cold, arrogant, or difficult. The reason for this lies not in the real qualities of the person, but in the inability of others to understand his inner world. What remains beyond their understanding escapes control, causing discomfort. Instead of engaging in open confrontation, you can create this awkwardness with just a glance, remaining calm and avoiding violent reactions. After all, silence is not emptiness, but a powerful presence, amplified many times over. This is a demonstration of the power of the mind, which has no need to declare itself with a cry. It patiently waits for its moment. And when the time comes to act, its decisions are distinguished by decisiveness, irresistibility, and finality. If an individual feels like a stranger in this noisy world, perhaps this is for the best. Perhaps his destiny is not to merge with the crowd, but to remain true to himself. He was born not to shout, but to be unshakable. Let him keep silent, and let others feel all his depth and strength.